understand that, yes, the market has been going through a fair amount of turbulence, but there are other very positive indicators as well. Inflation report yesterday was terrific. We are seeing interest rates plummeting. We're also seeing oil prices plummeting. Deregulation is happening. We need to get rid of so much of the nonsensical Biden-era deregulation. You know, sometimes people say, Charlie, what do you disagree with President Trump on? I don't even know if this is a disagreement. President Trump famously said, well, for every one new regulation, we have to get rid of 2 regulations. I think you shouldn't add any new regulations and get rid of 5, 6, 7,000 lines of regulation. Who says you have to add new ones? Just slash these ridiculous, nonsensical rules that are on the regulatory book that make it harder for businesses to be able to operate, to hire, and deploy capital. Maria Bartiromo says this perfectly, that we are seeing a decrease in oil prices, which you are going to feel at the pump in the next 2 weeks. We are seeing interest rates go down, which by the end of the year, we might see a significant cut in rates, which will help first-time homebuyers. Play cut 130.
That's what we've been pointing out this morning, and the president has been pointing it out. Rates are plummeting. Oil prices are plummeting. Deregulation is happening. You know, we've got all of these things happening. President Trump is not going to bend. He told me, a number of times that he's trying to build the economy and make it independent as opposed to relying on China for things like prescription drugs.
Now, I have to further explain the contrast to what President Trump is doing with tariffs versus what someone like Bernie Sanders would do with tariffs. And it's an incredibly important distinction. Let's say it was Bernie Sanders who once supported tariffs and in a tepid way says, yeah, we'll do tariffs. The difference is that if President Bernie Sanders, God save us from such a thing, would do tariffs, he would create a domestic control socialist economy. What President Trump is doing is incredibly unique, is that he is doing tariffs while liberating the American market economy. It's exactly the right ingredient. So tariffs are trade barriers. However, you can avoid a tariff by making products here. One of the reasons why we've been falling behind on manufacturing is because it's so hard to build new factories. And one of the greatest regulations of all is DEI. I believe DEI is the silent regulation that is an albatross around the neck of corporate America. DEI makes us less competitive. It makes us less entrepreneurial. It makes us take less risks. It prioritizes equity and racial parity or racial preferences over excellence, and you must choose. DEI is like the silent regulation that was written into every single corporate handbook by soft corporate and soft cultural decree post Floydapalooza. It was more about outcomes over opportunity, and not even about outcomes. It was honestly about a very perverted tribal racial preference doctrine that was force-fed into corporate America. So what President Trump is attempting to do is liberate the American economy through massive tax cuts, deregulation, energy boom, while having trade barriers. And that mixture should work. Again, we don't know, but you must remember people voted for this. I would have grave concerns about tariffs if President Trump was talking about massive tax increases, more regulation, more government programs, more government redistribution, and tariffs. Because then why would anyone want to do business here? What President Trump is doing is he's making it more appealing to invest while also having a penalty to not invest. So he's doing both those things. He's making the penalty to not invest be higher because we are the world's consumer. We are the premier consumer economy on the planet. Every country desires to be a consumer economy. Every country wants to be a consumer economy. We have achieved that. We also now want to go back to be an industrial economy. And here's the little secret. It's so much easier to rebuild an industrial sector than suddenly become a consumer economy. Because in order to become a consumer economy, you must be insanely rich. Very few countries are insanely rich. And China can't be a consumer economy internationally. They can't domestically because they don't want other countries' stuff to be sold in their country. Well, more for us. Being a consumer economy is not necessarily bad. What is bad is also not being a production economy. If you are both, you are a superpower the likes of which the world has never seen. And we can get that back. So President Trump doing tariffs plus domestic supply side market boom economics. There's a lot of talk about what's happening in Israel right now. Hostages being released, terrorists resurfacing, Gaza plans, and so on. But there's one thing we tend to overlook: the people of Israel. The war has taken a huge physical and emotional toll on the Jewish people. And that's why I want you to know about the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. And I want you to support the important work they do. IFCJ is on the ground throughout Israel, providing food and life-saving aid to the sick and elderly, even released hostages and their families. Join with me and visit ifcj.org/learn more. For some instant analysis, Senator Schmidt from the great state of Missouri joins us. Senator Schmidt, great to see you. Yesterday, there was some breaking news. The House passed the budget resolution. What is that? And within the budget resolution, were there details of no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, or was that just the precursor to be able to now get into those negotiations? Senator, please explain.
Yeah, great to be with you, Charlie. Yeah, exactly, the latter. So basically, the budget resolution sets the framework by which now we move into the reconciliation process, right? So it unlocks the process for the committees to go do the work, right? Like Ways and Means of the Senate Finance Committee to start to put meat on the bones of these ideas that have been talked about. Principally, making the tax cuts from 2017 permanent, extending those. And then you've got all the other things, the no tax on tips. You've got money for border security and deportations, because we're going to need help to make sure this mass deportation movement is actually funded, for defense. And then also, for permitting reform, hopefully on energy. And then lastly, and I think almost most importantly, some spending reforms. We've got to get this thing under control. Charlie, I tell people that here's what's interesting. In 2019, not 1919, in 2019, we were spending about $4 trillion. We spend $7 trillion after the last 4 years of the Biden budget and the COVID orgy spending, right? We take in $5 trillion. So if we can actually have some reform, bend that curve, have revenues with all of the good things that are happening with President Trump catch up, it's realistic to think we can have a balanced budget in a few years. But we've got to do that hard work, and we can do that in the reconciliation process too, which only takes a simple majority in the Senate. And I think for the audience, that's the most important thing. If the House can hang together and Senate Republicans can hang together on this, we don't need a single Democrat vote. I wouldn't expect to get one because they're not rational at this point. So we got to make sure we take care of our own business here.
So Senator, one question I have, I agree. The amount of money we are borrowing is extraordinary. I mean, it is as if it's when COVID happened, we decided to just put back all of our monetary or fiscal, I should say, impulses of fiscal discipline. And we've decided to basically embrace the cheap money guzzle. However, Senator, there are rumors that we might increase the Department of Defense budget to $1 trillion. Where do you anticipate these spending cuts coming from? I'm all for a big and mighty military. However, first and foremost, I think the greatest threat to our national security is our national debt, not even any existential foe. So build out where you think some of these cuts will come. More broadly, I know that you have to keep your cards close to your chest, but if we're talking about an increase in the defense budget, where else can these cuts come from?
Sure, and you're right. I think that it's coming into focus now. We spend more. We spend $1 trillion a year on the interest on that $36 trillion debt. That's only going to grow as some of these things become more mature and they need to be refinanced with higher interest rates over the last few years because of Biden inflation, right? So that problem is only going to get more significant unless we can find real savings. I think there's two ways to look at this. One is there's a lot of discretionary spending that we're finding the savings. This is the work that DOGE is doing, right? And so we've already, just take USAID as an example. All of that money, Guatemalan sex changes, DEI and Burma, LGBTQIA, programming in Sesame Street in Iraq, that all stuff, that adds up, right? And that's the kind of thing, like take Marco Rubio, what he said, 83% of the stuff we were doing, we're not going to do that anymore. The 17% that remains, we're going to go move in further American interests overseas, right? That's the kind of reform you have internally that DOGE finds that gets embedded in savings moving forward. What are some other things you can do? I think what's broadly popular is work requirements. If you're an able-bodied adult, you should be required to work. That explosion under Obamacare is really affecting people who need it most, Medicaid. So when President Trump talks about making sure we're not touching Social Security, not making sure we're touching benefits on Medicare and Medicaid, I think we're all with him in lockstep. But we got to make sure that the able-bodied population that's not working, they're draining the system. They're crowding hospitals. They're crowding out doctor visits for pregnant mothers, individuals with disabilities, what that program was really meant for. So there's a lot of work to do, as I said, to put meat on the bones there. But I think we can get there. And here's the way to look at it. If we just went back to pre-pandemic spending, Charlie, 2019 spending levels, plus inflation and population growth, that's like $1 trillion difference than what we're spending right now. So I think we can make some real progress here.
So I now want to get into the tariff aftermath. I mean, you come from a state that has a lot of ag and a lot of once mighty industry, and also a fair amount of exporting and international business. How are your major industries in Missouri thinking about these tariffs? And what is your message to some of the audience that might be a little worried that tariffs might mean higher prices and that we might have a little bit of economic uncertainty coming down the next couple of months?
Yeah, I spent a lot of this week, I think, defending President Trump's leadership in Washington. And permanent Washington's totally disconnected from what's really happening. Sort of the global elites have had their run here. After World War II, we had all these favorable deals for countries who were trying to get back on their feet: Germany, Japan, all these countries. And with the goal of defeating Soviet communism. Okay, we won. After the Cold War ended, though, we didn't adjust at all. So you can't buy, or you don't see an American car in Europe. You don't see an American car in Japan. You don't see an American car in Korea. Yet all of their cars are in our markets because they have erected these barriers over time through tariffs, trade barriers, in China specifically, stealing our IP. It's been very unfair to us. And I do come from a state, and I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood where all those good-paying jobs, those factory jobs, they went overseas. Fentanyl, we got fentanyl in exchange. And so my message is America isn't an economic zone. America isn't some strip mall with an airport attached to it. It's a people. It's a place. It's our home. And we finally have a president that's willing to stand up and say, you know what, we've been treated very unfairly. We're going to treat you like you treat us. And now look what's happening. 70 countries plus have come to the table and said, we heard what you had to say. We understand the United States of America is 39% of all the consumption in the world. It's 25% of the world's GDP. It's a very important market for us. So we're going to lower our trade barriers so that we can, actually have fair trade. So President Trump has made tremendous progress on this. And by the way, it opens up markets for our farmers and our other industries around the world. I think the way to look at this, Charlie, is you've got two different buckets. You've got communist China and you've got everybody else. China is the worst offender. They made a terrible decision in trying to escalate this. They rip off our IP. They steal our jobs. They create trade barriers. They say, oh, yeah, no, you can't sell your chickens here because you didn't wash them properly, or you can't sell your electronics here because there's this bolt that's out of place. So it's not just the tariffs. It's all the other hidden trade barriers that prevent our goods getting to market. They export 5 times more than we export to them. They have a hell of a lot more to lose in this if they continue down this path. So we'll see if they have a come to Jesus moment or not. I think the rest of the world is. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to lead to greater prosperity for us because we're going to have more markets open. We'll have more revenue coming into this country, and we'll bring back industry, those good paying jobs that we had for a very long time that didn't need to go somewhere else.
Senator Schmidt, we are out of time. Thank you for your leadership, and we will be talking to you soon. Please keep the pressure on your Senate colleagues for massive and real spending cuts, and we need money for border security. So you got to reconcile those two things, no pun intended, during this reconciliation package. Thank you so much, Senator. Really appreciate it.
We'll do it, brother. Take care. See you.